we have the last couple of speakers, and it's Rimante and Simon. They're both agile coaches at Danske Bank, and they will tell us, well, pretty straightforward. Stop wasting your time with retrospectives. Hi, guys. You are in a very big screen right now, and in the Matrix, as I can see. Okay, guys, the stage is yours. Prepare for maybe a few questions afterwards, but otherwise, let's go.
Cool, but first of all, welcome to our session. Again, we think you should stop wasting your time with retrospectives. So before we jump into it, we will just shortly introduce ourselves. So my name is Simon. Again, I work at Danske Bank. I consider myself an agile nerd. I like to train. I like to facilitate. Again, I have facilitated quite many retrospectives, and a lot of those learnings we'd like to share today. And I also like to speak from time to time. And I'm here today with a fellow coach, Rimante.
Yes, hello. So my name is Rimante Petkeviciene. As Simon said, I am his colleague. We both together work at Danske Bank, which a year ago had quite a big transformation. And before that, I had several hats, including that of a Scrum Master as well as Quality Assurance Specialist. And it's the last one that I believe basically leaves me to seek value and quality in everything I do, including the retros. So throughout our career, both Simon and I had a chance to participate and facilitate a lot of retrospectives. And now that we build more and more stuff every day, I guess it's no longer a surprise to see a retrospective in our calendar. So the thing is that however many retros we end up having, never mind how regular this thing is within our lives, very often we find ourselves asking questions like, shouldn't we get more value out of them? Or how many of our retrospectives actually lead to significant improvements?
Yeah, and even better, I have a friend at Microsoft that you could actually activate a plugin that could calculate how expensive a given meeting is. So again, if you calculate a team with up to 10 persons participating in 1.5 hour retrospective, it can easily become a very expensive meeting or event if you're not getting the value out of it. So that is the whole point of our talk today, is how can we, again, not stop doing retrospectives, but how can we stop the waste at least? So what we'll do is we'll walk you through 3 anti-patterns that we have identified, and we will also come up with some possible solutions and inspirations that you can go back and use. So and at the end we will of course have some questions, because we always know that people have opinions and are curious about how to do it. So we would like to collaborate on that. So to jump to the first anti-pattern is the one we call the Wheel of Fortune. And again, a huge credit to Aino Corey, a previous mentor of mine, who actually written a book called Retrospective Anti-Patterns that I can highly recommend if you want something to read, because there's not much material around actually about retrospectives, but this is one of them. So what do we mean with the Wheel of Fortune anti-pattern? So as you probably know, the template that we typically see in retrospectives is the one you see down in the corner here: start, stop, continuing, right? So if you Google retrospective templates, that is literally the first template that shows up. And that is probably for good reasons, because it's insanely simple and it's crazy fast to actually do and carry out. And it is also what Scrum Masters are taught at the certification trainings or other kind of trainings, because we have very little time when we're doing these trainings. So this is basically what they get in the toolbox day one. And again, of course, there can be value in it. But the problem with a template like this is that it is very, very fast, and we can very, very easy jump to some maybe wrong conclusions. So what we typically end up doing is, of course, brainstorming, start, stop, continuing. And again, we typically always see the cake for some reason, especially pre-COVID. But there can come specific topics like sprint planning took too long. That's typically one we see almost in every team from time to time, right? The sprint planning is just a long session or a long event, and it's dragging out the energy of people. And from every now and then, we also have something like boring task, right? But what we end up seeing is when people vote on which one is the most important thing to look at, then it's the sprint planning, because that symptom seems very, very obvious. So what do? We should start having faster sprint plannings. Again, we typically jump directly to some actions that are very, very simple or very, very easy to carry out without digging in deeper necessarily. And that is one of the issues with the Wheel of Fortune anti-pattern here, is that we tend to only look at the symptoms when we do a retrospective format like this. Yes, it's really, really good to get rid of all of the things that were going bad in the last retrospectives, but they could be based on a lot of different problems with many possible causes. So the root cause here is actually that we don't treat the problem, we are actually only treating the symptom. And sometimes the symptom is the problem, and that's why it's the Wheel of Fortune, because then you win. But more often than not, you are actually treating a symptom that is not, or trying to fix a symptom that is not the real problem. And again, example here again with the sprint planning took too long. It's a quite urgent symptom, right? We want to fix it. That's why it's getting a lot of votes, because it's impacting the whole team. But there could be many, many different problems and causing this symptom here. Again, it could be lack of refinement, it could be lack of understanding of the event. There are so many possible causes here that we don't know actually if it's a big or a small thing we actually need to work at. And if we take the other one, boring task, okay, a single person in the squad have had a boring task, right? But so nobody actually votes on that other than the person, him or herself. But again, if you actually would dig a bit deeper into something like this, the potential problem and cause could be a very complex one. It could be a person that have demotivation, not collaborating with the rest of the squad, etc. So we are lacking the insights here into what is actually causing the symptom. And if we don't treat the problems and the causes, the problems will reoccur. Again, you have probably all been in retrospectives where the same symptom or even problem comes up again and again. And that is because we are not really fixing the problems. We are trying to fix the symptoms instead. And that's why retrospectives can sometimes get a bad reputation, because if they're not working, if they're not actually fixing the problems, then why should we even do it? And the worst thing that can happen is that we actually end up accepting these symptoms and problems because we are not fixing them either, right? So that's a really, really dangerous place to be in. So what we want instead is, of course, to look at how can we mitigate this. Our proposal here today is to, of course, work with a little more structured way of doing retrospectives. We don't want to introduce a whole lot, to be honest. I know there's a lot of information here, but to the left, we have what we call the 5 stages of a retrospective. Again, it's a book by Esther Darby and Diana Larsen called Agile Retrospectives. That's the second book we recommend, and also a very, very good tool for facilitators. So you can probably see there are 5 main stages to go through: setting the stage, gather data, generate insights, decide what to do, and close down. And what we typically do in a retrospective, at least the one we showed before, is the primary gathering data and decide what to do. We are not really spending time on generating insights. And that is what we think is kind of the key to getting better retrospectives. So if you look in the middle here, again, you can see the 5 stages on how we brainstorm a lot of good ideas in the gather data. We get all of these dots or post-its on the board. But again, it can be an information overload, to be honest. And there's a lot of, again, possible problems and causes underneath of these. So we need to gather some insights and get a shared picture for the whole team. So below here is 4 concrete tools that you can go back and use for this step here in the retrospective. The very, very most simple one is, of course, walking the board. Again, visit each post-it, make sure that the person is sharing his or her opinion about why they wrote it, and make sure the team asks questions to get an understanding about it. And you can probably get a lot of good discussion already at this stage here. But again, just by, again, talking about them, putting a few more words on it before voting on them is a really, really good thing to do. Then we have something like identify patterns. Again, if you do use a more advanced one like the timeline for gathering a retrospective, where you put the whole sprint on a timeline, and you can add post-its, red for bad experiences, green for good experience, and yellow for you are in doubt. Then you can actually see if there are patterns. Maybe there were a bug in the first part of the sprint that got bigger and bigger and bigger, and it got led into a lot of chaotic situations. So you can then actually try to see some patterns here. How are things connected when you visualize it like that? Then a little more advanced tool is the 5 whys. Again, you probably have heard it before, but if you ask why something happened 5 times, you will often find the root cause of a given problem. Sometimes you will not find it, and then you will, of course, need to repeat it again. But simply by asking, so why our product owner not interested in estimation or story point estimation? Then the person will reply, I don't actually know what it is. So why do our product owner not know what story point estimation is? Because nobody taught him. And you can then slowly find the root cause, and you will actually often be surprised on how simple the causes are. Again, we simply forgot to actually train or coach the product owner into this way of thinking about estimation. Again, I have experienced that a lot of times. The last one is the circle of questions. It's definitely for more advanced facilitators, and also for teams that are willing to try something new. But by sitting in a circle, or you can form a virtual circle in your virtual call, you can have the way you do it is you ask a question to a person next to you about a given problem, and ask if they have any suggestions or solutions. And based on his or her answer, that person will then ask the next person about what they think about his or her solution. And then you will continue asking each single team member what they think about it. And you will actually get all opinions in a quite interesting format. So 4 concrete tools you can go back and use. The last thing I just want to highlight here is, again, so how could an agenda look like? Again, to the left, we have the very simple one that probably most teams use: start, stop, continue. We dot vote, and we create some kind of action. What we like to suggest is spend 5 minutes just on setting the stage, making sure that people know why they're here. What are we going to do today? Then gather the data, use the start, stop, continue if that works for your team. Then walk the board and vote. That could be one option. And if you want to actually try something even more extensive, then use the 5 whys to actually find the root causes. And then you can create some very, very good next steps. So again, it will take a little longer time, but we definitely think it will be worth the investment, because you will actually get to the root causes instead of just handling or treating the symptoms. So this was the Wheel of Fortune anti-pattern, which can really help you. But we also see that we sometimes, again, are choosing the completely wrong exercises for the wrong team. And I think you, Rimante, have a good point about that.
Let's say about that, but following up on the topic of improved agenda that Simon just touched upon, we follow up to our next anti-pattern retrospective format, which in itself can often be a problem. And let me start by introducing you to a bit of an example. So let's say we just ended our 2-week sprint and we gather to a retro. The facilitator is very excited. They come into a room and say, okay, now our iteration is completed. Let's think of what song represents our last iteration best. We have a bit of a laugh. We all share some songs, the tune. We are having a nice mood. And in general, facilitator continues with another exercise where we try to imagine that a fairy just flew into the room, and we suddenly have a proposition to fulfill our biggest wish, solving the problem that we have at work overnight. So what do we wish for? Once again, we brainstorm, we share some ideas, we now see some kind of problems appearing that we might want to have solved. But that doesn't end there. The facilitator continues with asking us to write a letter to our future selves, imagining that 2 more weeks have passed since our problem was fixed. And when we try to analyze, okay, so how does it feel? How do we recognize that the problem is no longer there? So we take a sheet of paper, each of us, we try to write a very nice letter to our future selves. But of course, now we have a bit of a problem. We have a bit of how we see that a problem would be disappearing, but that's not true, right? There are no fairies actually. So we get another exercise to imagine, okay, so what villain is standing in our way, preventing us to get our problems fixed? And of course, for better visualization, let's not forget to draw the villain, to name them, and to identify the weakness so that we know how to tackle that one. So I hope we didn't lose too many people from the audience with that example. But in general, what it leads to is too much gamification. And don't get me wrong, gamification in itself, it's not a bad thing. I honestly used all of these formats at one point or another. It's just that the problem appears when we mix too many of them and we use them too extensively. Because very often within a teams, you will have team members who absolutely hate gamification. And for those people, it will be a negative thing because they are not leaning in, they are not buying into your format, and we feel less willing to express what's happening and what happened in the last iteration. And even for those people, for those team members who enjoy gamification to some extent, you will see that it's easy for them to lose their focus because we no longer are actually looking at what happened, what problems we're facing, what are the root causes. But in general, we are just lost in a game trying to kind of have a good mood and just spend an hour with a team. So too much gamification is not too good. Does it mean we just end up with simple retros? Not really. You've seen Simon already introduce a couple, not a couple, but that one simple format that we first find when we go to Google. So stop, start, continue. And in general, you can have a lot of differentiation with simple formats as well, like disliked, learned as well, like what happened well, what didn't go too well. But even though if we vary between these simple formats, that will not always be the best option. And for some teams, I've definitely seen it work, but that was teams like where everybody was very into not gamified things. However, more often than not, you will see that within your teams, you will have at least a couple of members who feel way more comfortable talking about a shipwreck or your boat sinking than touching upon real production issues, talking about it directly. So, before jumping into some potential solutions, let's quickly spend a couple of minutes looking into what makes us pick the wrong format. What we identified first is inexperience. So very often you will end up having a Scrum Master or facilitator who is either new to facilitation or new to the team. So we don't have yet a lot of background on a team, or they Googled the first thing that came up and they stuck with it. Another option is they found the Bible of Retromat and they just got so into it that they are just adding a lot of gamification into it. So inexperience can be one of the things that make us pick wrongly. Another one is listening to a loudest talker in a room. You will notice that whenever you're working with teams, very often it's that two people in a room who are talking the loudest and always shouting that they don't like anything gamified and they want to just stick to a simple format. But in general, you are having still like a majority of a team who don't speak up very often because they just don't really care too much at first, or they just can express themselves in any format that we like, but often we will listen to those people who are expressing their opinion and we will simply stick to a simple format instead. And the last thing that we identified, of course, it's not the last, I think, for all of us, but just one we wanted to mention, is lack of alternating facilitation. So more often than not, you will have, for example, a Scrum Master who joins the team and they are always facilitating the retros themselves. But what that leads to is that that person is always facilitating a bit from their own perspective. So when you are working with a team, it's very easy for you to notice what are the issue areas, and you can lean kind of towards that format where it's just touching the problems that you want to touch. So if you don't have a rotation, not everyone gets represented necessarily. But continuing with the possible solutions then, let's look at what we have there. So first, what we recommend is choosing an agenda that is tailored to your context. And what does it mean? In general, it means that you need to look at your team and think, what kind of stage is it at? Is it a new team? Is it an established Scrum team? Is it a team with low morale? And if we take an example of how your agenda could look like for different possibilities, if we have a new team, for example, first thing you would most likely want to focus on is trust building. So you want them to have a couple of laughs among themselves. You want the team as well to be kind when we are talking about bigger issues. And that's what could help you is more warm-ups. So let's say with a new team, you want to start with some simple formats so that they get a grasp of a retro. But introducing a warm-up, like let's say the seasons have just changed and you want to ask your team members, okay, so what kind of season is your favorite? Why is that? And stuff like that. That will allow them to ease into a retro and also to get to know one another better. As well with new teams, something you want to consider is looking into quick wins. So normally when you have a new team, we always want to solve everything that's happening within the organization itself. And that's not always possible. So just encourage them to pick the things we can solve within the iteration so that we get that momentum. And later on, it's easier for them to tackle the bigger issues that appear. And that will also allow you to get a buy-in and trust that retrospectives are actually bringing value to them. If we take another example, for example, established Scrum teams, so it's people who have been working together for at least a year or something like that. Something we would like to consider is introducing fixed topics. So let's say you had 5 retrospectives and it always comes up that your releases are not too smooth. But what does it mean? It just gets buried under 20 different things that come up due to past 2 weeks of what happened. And usually we don't end up solving it. So try to find a focused topic that you can just do one retro on. So that can be either releases if they are not working for you, maybe the communication is not the greatest, maybe you want to inspect how your Scrum events are going, and deep dive into those. Within that deep dive, you will see deeper patterns and be able to focus on solving one big thing rather than just discussing what's not right, that there is no cake that sprint, like Simon mentioned. And when deep diving, just keep in mind that considering extended time box is a good thing. Sometimes for the retro, if you have it for 1 hour or 90 minutes, it's enough. But if you want to deep dive into a topic, it might require more time. And the last example of tailoring the agenda we have is a team with low morale. So let's say people are dissatisfied with their work. They don't understand what's happening. Perhaps things don't get solved when we need them to. So with this kind of team, try to gather data over a longer period of time. If it's something that's related to the mood, try to do something like daily mood meters, where at a retro, you can take a look at what happened throughout the 2 weeks. If everybody felt bad on the first Wednesday, so why was it, what happened there, and so on. Or even if you don't manage to, for example, complete your sprint successfully, then perhaps look at the items. Is it that we get some spikes? Is it that we get more support tickets? Is it that we just get interrupted, or whatever is happening? So gather data and try to look at it during the retro. And with this kind of team where the low morale is very strong, just look at implementing the changes and focus on that. Because if you start implementing those changes, the morale should at least start to improve, because we can see as well that things are happening. We are able to change our environment, what's happening. And as well, don't be too afraid. And I even encourage you to focus on storytelling. When the morale is very low, normally people want to be heard. And that's what we want to focus on. So you can also do that with an example what Simon mentioned before with circle of questions. So in general, after these 3 examples of how I would tailor for new team, for established team, for team with low morale, what you need to do is ask yourself, what is your team context at the moment and what focus does it require? So despite tailoring the agenda, another thing that you can consider is alternating facilitator. And that alternation can be of 2 types at least. So you can consider an internal person, someone from a team taking over for one retro or once in a while. It's just important thing if you have a new team, do a couple of facilitations for yourself first so that we see what kind of value retro brings, what kind of format should look like, what we are trying to achieve there, and try to onboard that person if you're picking from within the team. And if you are choosing an external person, and that could be anyone from your company, it can be someone from outside, it can be just another Scrum Master, coach, or even a developer that you know that facilitates retros very well. Just be aware to align that to the team, because retrospectives are quite a vulnerable thing if you are very open in them. So make sure that we are aware that this is something we are considering. Make sure you have a buy-in from when inviting an outside person. And last but not least, invest time in preparation. So first of all, research, make it a bit of your habit. And it's very recommended, especially for internal facilitators. So it can be anything like looking at articles, talking with your Scrum Master, and reading books, but I guess we will not ask to read a book for a first person who's just facilitating the retro. And another thing is interview, or you can call it just having a cup of coffee with the person. And I think that will be more applicable to external facilitator, because the expectation when we invite a person is that we know what kind of situation we are stepping in so that they can tailor the agenda to your needs best. So it would be them booking a coffee with you, asking, is it a new team? Do you have new team members? What kind of issues are you facing? What is the current mood within a team? That will allow them to tailor the agenda best to what you need. And of course, that doesn't leave out you as facilitator if you're not kind of alternating. So even if you have a team that's performing well and you see something's not happening to right, like for example, you have action items just to have action items, not because they arise naturally. So try and invest time yourself and do some research on what can solve a situation. So potential solutions for retrospective format: look at your context, tailor the agenda, alternate facilitator if that's possible for you, and of course, invest time in preparation. And yeah, if it's just you and not someone you're inviting in, those 2 books that we showed are very highly recommended. So we talked a bit about the Wheel of Fortune. We have a good format. So in general, we should be able to select a good action item at the end. Is that right? Mostly yes, but it's not always the selection of the action item, but it's actually following up.
Indeed. So again, we jump to anti-pattern 3 here. So that's the lack of following up. So again, we experienced that we are actually sometimes very good at identifying the things we need to change and what is the problem actually. But what ended up happening, and I think it happening to a lot of teams, is that we start a new sprint, we have a new focus, new sprint goals, and we just ended up focusing on that and drowning in the work. There's coming maintenance and bugs, and that awesome improvement that we identified last Friday again, because most teams unfortunately still end sprints on a Friday and start the following Monday. So again, that long weekend, you forgot all about that awesome retrospective you did, and now you are focusing all on the new sprint planning. Again, you are not as sad as you were Friday, and the issues you had in the retrospective is not that important right now. They may come up again during the sprint, but again, what we see again is unfortunately that we tend to focus a lot on the new sprint and kind of forget the following up of the action item we identified. So again, pro tip: do not, if you can, end sprints on a Friday. Try to end them on Tuesday or Wednesday, because then you will have a lot more focus and you will have a lot more memory of the retrospective, and it will be fresh in mind, and you can actually remember what you are going to work with. But let's say they actually again put it on the sprint backlog and into the sprint. The problem is still that we have the feeling that no one really owns it. Again, yes, the team should ideally own their own improvement from the retrospective, but again, as I mentioned, it's not really development. Most of these things here requires other capabilities, either going to talk to people, or we're going to investigate some tool, we are going to ask other teams to do something or us. And again, it's not as attractive for a team member to work with these improvements when there is this awesome prior one or even prior zero thing we need to work on. So that's a really big issue we see in everyday Scrum and sprinting. And then there's the feeling that we cannot really do anything about it, right? Again, last Friday we identified this is the thing we need to do, but when reality hits and we have to start actually breaking it out or figuring out what we can do, we get the feeling that we cannot really do anything. And again, the product owner and the sprint goals are in your back head, so you just pick whatever is in progress that is more easy to do. So again, there is again, the ownership, I think it's there, but again, we just tend to prioritize the development work way higher. And again, that leads to the third point here is then again, who cares? Again, at the review, we've focused so much on the customer value and getting some feedback from stakeholders, and they are asking questions into, can we get this and can we get that as well? Again, rarely you see stakeholders asking, so how, what improvement did you work on as a team? Again, there's really no reward for the team doing these things, other of course, and the reward of course being more efficient and getting a more happy team. But no one is really remembering you of this, so it's really up to the team and to figure out a way to have focus on this. And we just see that everyday sprint goals just seems to to require all of the focus basically. So Rimante, do you want to take us through some potential counteractions?
Yes, of course. So a couple of things we recommend is visualize it, revisit, and reward it. So let's start with a visualization part. If you're still having a privilege to work from the office, for those for whom it's a privilege, then consider writing your action items on the whiteboard in your room. If you don't have a whiteboard, just print it on a sheet of paper, stick it to a wall so that everyone can see it when they are walking by to grab a cup of coffee, and it will be very clearly visible and help you a lot, I think. At least I tried that with sprint goals and it helped us in a different situation. Another thing you can do is actually add it into your sprint backlog. So a lot of teams you might see doing it, then they actually just have a swim lane of retrospective actions. So it's the first thing that you see when you come into your board during the daily. And it was actually a prescribed guidance in Scrum Guide of 2017. And it was changed in 2020 as may be added. So choose based on yourself. What it really helps with is that even the items that are not development heavy, you will notice they go through a very similar development cycle. So they need to be refined. That very often happens in the retrospectives, but we are not often too smooth. Some of them might require more refinement. Then they need to be developed, they need to be tested and reviewed, most likely by the whole team. And when we deploy them, they become our agreements, they become the part of how we work, if, of course, we agree that this is working out for us once we experiment. But yeah, adding it to your sprint backlog, so it's the first thing you see when you open a board, is something you could definitely consider. A second thing that we recommend is actually revisiting action items. And no, I don't mean in a retrospective that you have after another sprint. I mean revisiting it more often. For a lot of people, it can be during daily Scrum, but that makes most sense if you add it to a sprint backlog because it will be something you go through. And another thing, if you don't add it, for example, to Sprint Backlog, is revisiting it during mid-sprint check-in. So a lot of teams do it where in the middle of a sprint, they just do a walk through a board, we look at the tasks that are not even assigned, we evaluate if we are still on track, if there are anything if there's anything that's blocking us, and so on. And during that time, normally what we do is we revisit sprint goals. So as well, retrospective actions are not an exception. It's something we can definitely look at there. And yeah, even if you don't pick any of these, you can consider, of course, tagging them. So make sure we have some assignee and tag them in the Confluence, so at least we can get some reminder to revisit it from time to time. And the third potential solution is actually rewarding it. So like Simon mentioned, it's very difficult to find stakeholders who are actually invested into you accomplishing the actions that you agree upon. So first place where you can try to find that investment is sprint planning. So we bring sprint goals more often than not there. Why not bring action items, especially if we are working on some improvements that can actually help us. So try to make sure that your stakeholders hear about what kind of improvements the team makes, and perhaps get inspiration when they go back to their teams so that they can try implementing something similar. Regarding the reward part, you can also try to gamify it. We know how much we like those things. So that can be anything from bringing it to overall retro and sharing that it was a success as a success story. You can bring it to town halls, all hands meetings, where it's not just your team sharing, but all the team sharing and gathering kind of inspiration from one another so we can try out different things. Or it can be something like group newsletter where you share that you have these action items fulfilled and how they helped you, session on success stories, Teams channel where you post wins. So just try to make sure that it gets recognized by others and perhaps even implemented by others as well. So following up, make sure it's visual, make sure it's revisited, and try to make it rewarded. And that basically sums up our third anti-pattern.
Cool. So just to wrap up, again, we think you should stop wasting your time with retrospectives, at least if you are in that position. And we believe strongly that you should start not to rely on luck. Again, the Wheel of Fortune. Again, try to gather more insights during your retrospectives. Do not just take the first post-it that everybody likes, but actually walk through them consistently and in a structured way. Then finding the right format for the right team. Again, making sure that we have a format that motivates the team and doesn't drag out the energy of them. That will strongly improve the retrospective. It will improve the participation, the collaboration in general. And yes, you will sometimes pick the wrong format for the team just because you don't know it yet, and you have to try and you will fail, but you will soon succeed again. So and lastly, follow up on your action items. Again, there's nothing worse than spending all of these valuable minutes together and spending time on identifying and selecting and gather the insights for a problem, but if you don't actually invest the time to fix it, then it is almost a waste of time. Of course, there's value in talking to each other, but again, it would be so much more beneficial if you actually got rid of the actual problem and the root causes to those problems. So that concludes our talk. Again, the two books we read the most when we are working with retrospectives is these two here. But again, there's a lot of online material that you can be inspired from as well. So I think we have time for a few questions now.
Yeah, and thank you for staying till the end. Most likely you're tired and hungry by now.
Thank you very much, Rimante and Simon. Yeah, actually, it's kind of, you can feel it in the air that people are slightly tired, slightly sleepy. Maybe it's lunch, maybe it's the fact that it's the end of the first day. Let me check if we have any questions online. I think I haven't seen them 5 minutes ago. Yeah, we have a lot of comments about your presentation, but we don't have exact questions yet. Maybe we have some questions in the live audience. For example, what time tomorrow do you come to this event again? Everybody knows. I'm glad. Yes, you have a question. Well, I can come, but I'm tired too, so no. What about items which are not actionable, actually? Impossible to resolve.
Good question. So, are they actually impossible? That's a question you always need to ask yourself. Again, you can always break down complex problems or chaotic situations into something and start doing some experiments. They may not solve it at all, but I think when you are in a situation like this, you just have to try something out, so you know you're at least trying. Of course, at some point, there is what we call the soup or the culture of the company. Yes, we cannot get rid of compliance when we are in a bank, because that is probably what is slowing us down the most, to be honest. So, of course, there will be things that we just have to accept in one way or another. But again, as Rimante mentioned, again, sometimes, again, let's try to invest a retrospective on this topic. Yes, we're not going to change and get rid of compliance day one, but maybe there's something we can do. Maybe we can highlight it and take a small step in the right direction. So yes, you may need to do some experiments and you will probably fail some of them, but I think there's nothing, you just have to start experimenting and designing some retrospectives to help deal with them, because otherwise, yeah, it will be too demotivating to work there, right?
Exactly, and especially if there are problems that are more company related, where you cannot do something yourself, at least I think you will come up with an action item to escalate it, because the worst thing that can happen is that we just accept it as something we cannot fix and just continue mentioning it without bringing any value to it.
Thank you very much. We have a question online. Thomas is asking, how much time should a team spend on a retrospective? I feel that the regular hour is not enough to get really good results.
Yes, and that's coming back to, again, where is the team? Again, are they smooth running retrospectives, or are they still experimenting with the format? Again, for a 2-week sprint, if we are following the textbook, then it's a 90-minute session at maximum. You can do it, of course, quicker, but it is up to 90 minutes for a 2-week sprint. So I definitely don't recommend an hour when you can actually spend 90 minutes. And I guess back to Rimante's point, again, sometimes you should extend the time box, but again, extend it only if you have a purpose for extending it, right? So again, the question you need to answer as well is also, how much of the actual solution will you do in the retrospective, and how much of the solution will you carry over to the sprint and to the action item? Again, if you have a mindset of you want to solve it during the retrospective, you probably need a lot more time. But if you just want to identify it and add some details to it, and then you fix it in the coming sprint, then you should, of course, stick to the 90 minutes. So it really depends, I think.
And if you're already sensing that an hour is not enough, that's your first indication. Just don't change the whole invite if that's the case. And team, for example, doesn't like long meetings. Just, let's say, encourage them to try it for one time. Try to set it to an hour and a half and see how that works. If that works out better, then try to do that in that slot. And even if you have an hour and a half retro and you don't need all the time, you will not sit there and just do nothing. You will end the meeting earlier. So there's no issue with that. And of course, one other thing, what it will depend on is the size of a team. So if you have a team of 6 members compared to a team of 10, of course, it will require more time.
Thank you very much again. And any more questions from the audience? Not really. Okay, so thank you very much, Rimante and Simon. Very informative session. And well, it's time to say goodbye for the first day.